Another thug playing dress-up in stolen clothes. That was the thought running through Officer Derek Matthews' mind as he sneered into his radio, sitting in his patrol car just outside the Millbrook Heights police station. He had been working this beat for 17 years, and in that time he had learned to trust his instincts, or at least he believed he had. From his vantage point across the street at the Chevron gas station, he noticed a black man step out of a pristine luxury sedan, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit and gleaming shoes, exuding a quiet confidence. For Matthews, this sight instantly triggered suspicion rather than admiration. In his worldview, men like that didn't belong here, especially not dressed like corporate executives. He floored the gas pedal, tires screeching as his cruiser leapt across the intersection and came to a jarring stop, blocking the gas station exit. His chest puffed with a sense of authority as he stormed out, immediately barking a challenge. "Hey boy, where'd you steal that fancy ride?" The man froze momentarily by the gas pump, not in fear but in disbelief. Other customers at the station turned their heads, shocked by the unnecessary aggression. Matthews shoved his shoulder roughly, then in the same breath accused him of assault. "That's an assault on a police officer," he declared with feigned indignation, already building the foundation for a charge that did not exist. The man raised his hand slowly, jaw tight, posture exuding controlled rage rather than submission. Matthews hovered his hand over his weapon, enjoying the intimidation, his eyes gleaming with the cruel satisfaction of dominance. All of this unfolded directly across from the modern brick building of Millbrook Heights Police Station, a place that should have symbolized law and fairness, but instead stood as a silent witness to injustice in broad daylight. This was Millbrook Heights, Georgia. To an outsider driving down Millbrook Avenue, it appeared to be the very picture of suburban perfection. $1 million homes lined tree-shaded streets, American flags waved from porches, soccer moms drove spotless SUVs, and neighbors greeted each other with practiced warmth. Yet beneath that postcard surface lay a rigid hierarchy, an unspoken expectation about who belonged and who didn't. For newcomers, particularly people of color, the welcome was thin and conditional. Appearances, as David Richardson knew all too well, could be deceiving. At 42 years old, David carried himself with the calm authority of a man who had built his career brick by brick. Every achievement was earned, not given. His navy blue suit had been tailored to his athletic frame. His gold watch caught the late morning sun as he checked the time, 9:47 a.m. This was not just another Tuesday. This was the most important day of his professional life. Earlier that morning, at precisely 6 a.m., he had been in his hotel room reviewing the final stack of reports. Personnel files, budget allocations, crime statistics, community demographics, all of it had been studied until his eyes burned. He had spent 2 decades with Atlanta PD's Major Crimes Division, solving cases that drew national headlines, leading community outreach programs that cut crime rates in half, and earning a reputation as both a meticulous investigator and a compassionate leader. Preparation was his hallmark, and he had chosen this Chevron station for a deliberate reason. It sat directly across from the police station where he would, in just 30 minutes, walk through the front doors and introduce himself as the new chief of police for Millbrook Heights. The mayor had recruited him personally after an exhaustive nationwide search. The previous chief, a relic of the old-school mentality, had retired after 30 years of ruling the department like a private fiefdom. The force was nearly 90% white, its culture steeped in tradition and resistant to change. When David's appointment had been announced, the local newspaper's comment section had exploded with hostility. Outsider, political correctness. Token hire. The words had cut sharply, but he had endured worse in his rise through the ranks. He knew walking into Millbrook Heights would be like stepping onto a powder keg. Still, he believed in the values his parents had instilled in him back in rural Alabama. His father, a school principal, and his mother, a nurse, had drilled into him the lessons that character matters more than color, that education is the key that opens every door, and that perseverance can overcome prejudice. Those lessons had carried him this far, and he intended to carry them with him into his new role. The Chevron station hummed with the ordinary sounds of suburban life that morning. A contractor in paint-splattered overalls filled up his pickup truck. 3 mothers in yoga pants chatted as their SUVs idled. A businessman in a wrinkled shirt hurried out of the convenience store clutching a styrofoam cup of coffee and a breakfast sandwich. The scent of gasoline mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee from inside. Birds chirped from the oak trees shading the lot, while traffic moved steadily along Millbrook Avenue. For all intents and purposes, it was a normal morning, indistinguishable from countless others across suburban America. David pumped his gas methodically, rehearsing his introduction speech silently in his head. He wanted to strike the right balance, confident but not arrogant, authoritative yet approachable, experienced yet open to listening. His first impression would define his leadership. What he did not know was that even now, two of the men he would soon be commanding were already judging him through the narrow lens of prejudice. Officer Derek Matthews represented the entrenched old guard. At 45, conservative and set in his ways, he had patrolled this neighborhood for nearly 2 decades with the quiet assurance that nothing could threaten his authority. He was joined by his younger partner, Jake Sullivan, who, despite his age, shared Matthews's worldview. Both saw David's expensive car and his confident demeanor not as the hallmarks of success, but as suspicious anomalies. In their eyes, a black man in an expensive suit didn't belong here, not unless he was an athlete or entertainer. They saw theft where there was ownership, arrogance where there was professionalism. Years of operating under a system that shielded them from consequences had left them emboldened. Internal affairs complaints had a way of disappearing. Citizen grievances rarely went anywhere. Their union rep always knew the right words to diffuse accountability. In that environment, Matthews and Sullivan had grown confident that they were untouchable. The cruel irony was that they were about to racially profile and assault the very man who would soon hold their careers in his hands. David Richardson, new police chief of Millbrook Heights, was minutes away from introducing himself to his department as their leader, reformer, and visionary. Instead, he was about to become their victim. David replaced the gas cap and walked toward the convenience store to pay, his leather shoes tapping lightly against the asphalt. His movements were calm, deliberate, the walk of a man comfortable in his own skin. He passed a young mother herding 2 small children toward a minivan. She smiled politely. He nodded back warmly. An elderly man sitting on a bench with a newspaper waved, and David raised a hand in return. These small interactions, grounded in respect and courtesy, embodied the kind of community policing philosophy David wanted to bring to Millbrook Heights, one rooted not in intimidation, but in mutual respect. But Matthews and Sullivan saw none of this. They saw a target. They saw someone to remind of his place. To them, David's very existence in that parking lot was an affront. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the lot. The American flag above the police station snapped in the breeze, a symbol of ideals that were about to be betrayed. In 60 seconds, the fragile illusion of peace would be shattered. David had no idea that the badge clipped discreetly beneath his jacket, a symbol of authority and achievement, was about to become the most important piece of metal in his life. It would transform a routine stop into a federal civil rights case, turn hunters into the hunted, and ignite a reckoning that would reverberate far beyond Millbrook Heights. The stage was set. The players were in position. Justice was about to unfold in the most unexpected way imaginable. Matthews began striding across the parking lot like a predator stalking his prey, boots crunching against the loose gravel, his hand resting on his service weapon. The sunlight glinted off his badge, a false symbol of integrity, while his cold blue eyes locked on David with the same disdain he had carried for years. And David, unaware of the storm about to engulf him, was still silently practicing his opening lines, determined to set the right tone for his first day as chief. Matthews's boot struck the asphalt with heavy authority as he advanced, his posture exaggerated to project dominance. He stopped within arm's reach of David Richardson, his shadow falling across the polished navy suit, and barked an order designed to humiliate: license, registration, and proof of insurance, now. His voice carried loudly across the gas station, echoing off car windows and silencing conversations. The construction worker paused mid-sip of his steaming coffee. The soccer moms froze with doors half open. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. All eyes fixed on the spectacle. David, aware of the growing audience, reached slowly for his wallet with deliberate care. his cufflinks catching the sunlight as he moved. 2 decades of policing had taught him exactly what Matthews was attempting, an intimidation tactic, a manufactured display of authority meant to establish dominance before the crowd. There was no need for this escalation, no reasonable suspicion, no legitimate stop. David's jaw tightened as he maintained his composure. "Officer, I'm simply retrieving my identification," he said evenly, voice professional, every word chosen with precision. To Matthews, the calmness sounded like defiance. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowing. Respect in his worldview only flowed toward the badge, never the other way around. Educated speech and calm responses were, to him, a challenge to authority. "Slow movements," I said. "Slow," Matthews growled. David complied with measured dignity, pulling out the leather wallet with precise, deliberate gestures. He knew one wrong move could provide the excuse Matthews was itching for. Meanwhile, Officer Jake Sullivan circled to the other side of David's sedan, his boots scraping on the asphalt as he cupped his hands against the tinted window, peering inside theatrically. "Derek, I think we got ourselves a real problem here," he called out loudly enough for bystanders to hear, his voice tinged with exaggerated suspicion. The crackle of static from his radio heightened the tension, making onlookers nervous. A young mother instinctively pulled her toddler closer. Matthews took the driver's license from David's hand, scrutinizing it as though it were counterfeit evidence. He held it to the light, squinted, and rubbed his thumb across the laminated surface as though testing its authenticity, leaving greasy smudges behind. "David Richardson, Atlanta address," he muttered, then raised his eyes with deliberate condescension. "What are you really doing in our neighborhood, David?" He stressed the name as though it were bitter on his tongue, stepping closer until his coffee breath mixed with the sharp scent of aftershave and gasoline fumes. "Is this car even registered to you? Looks a little expensive for someone from your background." The word background hung in the air like a racial slur. Everyone listening understood its poisonous implication. Nearby, a mother quickly ushered her children into the convenience store, sneakers tapping hurriedly against the concrete. The elderly man folded his newspaper with discomfort, unable to watch but unwilling to leave. The gas pump clicked off automatically, the screen displaying 47 or 83, a mundane sound against the backdrop of racial tension. David drew a steady breath, his voice calm, professional, precise. "Officer, I'm legally parked on private property. I've committed no traffic violation, no crime. What is your reasonable suspicion for this stop?" The phrasing was textbook, the language of constitutional rights. But to Matthews it was an affront. His face contorted with anger, as though education itself were insolence. "Reasonable suspicion?" He barked, his laughter harsh and forced. "How about you matching the description of someone involved in recent break-ins? How about that fancy car and those clothes that don't match your demographic? How about the fact that you're clearly out of place here?" Every accusation was legally baseless. Matthews knew it. David knew it. But Matthews also knew that, for 17 years, the system had protected him. Internal affairs always found insufficient evidence. Citizen complaints vanished in filing cabinets, and the union defended every questionable action. Accountability was foreign territory. The small crowd that had gathered began to solidify, forming a semicircle around the scene. The construction worker set his coffee on the hood of his truck and pulled out his phone. One of the soccer moms raised her own phone with trembling fingers, recording quietly. A teenager walking to school stopped, eyes wide, backpack sliding down one shoulder, as she whispered to her friend, "Oh my God," while also starting to film. Sullivan, sensing the moment slipping, raised his voice theatrically. "I smell marijuana." His announcement hung absurdly in the crisp morning air, where the only scents were gasoline fumes and coffee. Still, he spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to being believed. David's composure cracked just slightly, his eyes narrowing in controlled anger. "Officer, there is no marijuana in my vehicle. I don't use drugs, and I would appreciate it if you stopped making false accusations." Matthews's face hardened. "Don't tell me how to do my job, boy." The last word cut through the air like a whip crack. Several witnesses audibly gasped. A middle-aged white woman in yoga clothes shook her head in disgust. The teenager filming muttered, "Did he just say that?" While her friend whispered back, "It's all on video." Matthews, undeterred, keyed his radio loudly, the static amplifying across the lot like a storm building. "Central," he declared, his voice booming. "We've got a suspicious individual in a potentially stolen vehicle at the Chevron on Millbrook Avenue. Requesting backup for a full search and possible arrest." The performance was for the crowd, the narrative already being constructed. David's fists clenched involuntarily, his knuckles pale against dark skin, as 2 decades of training battled with 2 decades of lived experience. His pulse quickened, his gold watch flashing in the sun as though marking every second of injustice. "Officer Matthews," David said, reading the nameplate pinned on the uniform. His voice remained steady, professional, refusing to surrender composure. "You have no probable cause for a search. I've committed no violation. I explicitly refuse consent for any search of my person or vehicle." His words, legally airtight, only provoked Matthews further. To ears accustomed to submission, legal precision sounded like arrogance. Matthews stepped closer, the sneer tightening on his face. "Probable cause? How about you matching the description of suspects? How about that attitude toward a sworn officer? How about the fact you don't belong in this neighborhood?" Each baseless claim piled higher, kindling for the fire. Phones recorded every word from multiple angles, ensuring this falsehood would not vanish quietly into a filing cabinet. The tension thickened as a second patrol car screeched into the lot, tires squealing unnecessarily, followed by a third. Officers Emma Rodriguez and Tom Bradley emerged, hands resting on holstered weapons, their mere presence an attempt at intimidation. Matthews turned to them with the satisfaction of a man who believed reinforcements validated his power. "Gentlemen, lady," he grinned, "we've got ourselves a situation here." The morning calm of suburban America now felt like a militarized occupation. Radios buzzed with chatter, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, the smell of rubber mixed with gasoline. David's eyes swept the scene with professional calculation. 3 patrol cars, 4 officers, multiple witnesses, phones recording steadily. He was outnumbered but not powerless. Years of experience told him to stay calm, document everything, and prepare for the legal record. His voice carried with clarity, measured and purposeful. "Officers, I want this stated clearly for every recording device present. I am David Richardson. I am legally parked on private property. I have committed no crime. I do not consent to any search. I am not resisting. I am complying with all lawful orders." His words were chosen to resonate in a courtroom as much as in this gas station lot, building a foundation for the inevitable case that was forming. But Matthews was far from done. He stepped closer, so near that David could smell the bitter coffee on his breath, could see the hatred burning in pale blue eyes. His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "You're in my town now. And in my town, people like you show respect to people like me. You got a problem with that, boy?" The threat hung heavy in the air. Multiple phones captured every syllable. Witnesses held their breath. The morning sun bore down on a scene that was spiraling toward violence. David Richardson stood his ground, every muscle taut, every instinct screaming that he was seconds away from escalation. Decorated veteran, respected officer, future police chief, none of that mattered here to the men surrounding him. They saw only his skin color. He had no idea that within minutes, his hidden badge would flip the script completely. But at this moment, he was a black man encircled by white officers who had already decided he was guilty. The balance of power felt crushing. The hunters believed themselves secure in their authority, blind to the reversal about to come. The tension in the Chevron lot thickened with every passing second. Matthews's aggressive tone, Sullivan's fabricated suspicion, and the arrival of backup cars transformed what had begun as a peaceful morning into the prelude of a confrontation that was about to spiral out of control. The casual hum of suburban life had already dissolved. In its place came a heavy silence, punctuated only by the static of police radios and the nervous whispers of onlookers. David Richardson stood in the center, shoulders squared, his suit pristine, but his expression hardening with each baseless accusation. He knew the trajectory of this encounter all too well. He had studied cases like this, read the reports, and trained officers on constitutional limits. Yet here he was, living the nightmare firsthand, across the street from the very station where he was meant to assume command. Matthews's eyes gleamed with a predator's satisfaction. "He's resisting," he muttered under his breath, though David hadn't moved. Sullivan circled again, hand brushing the car door, angling himself toward the gathered crowd to appear as though he were in danger. "Smells like weed," he repeated loudly, this time exaggerating a cough as if to validate his claim. Several witnesses frowned, sensing the performance. David raised his voice, speaking not just to the officers but to the phones recording from every angle. "For the record, officers, I am complying with every lawful order. I have committed no crime. I explicitly refuse consent to search." His words were chosen as though he were dictating a deposition. To Matthews, the composure was intolerable. His sneer deepened. 2 more squad cars screeched into the lot, their sirens unnecessary, but designed to send a message of dominance. Tires smoked as they halted abruptly. Officers Emma Rodriguez and Tom Bradley emerged with practiced authority, hands resting heavily on their weapons. Their presence alone signaled escalation, not resolution. Matthews, emboldened, gestured broadly like a circus ringmaster. "Gentlemen, lady, we've got ourselves a situation." The small crowd had become a substantial audience. The construction worker balanced his phone on his truck hood for a steady shot. A teenager had gone live on social media, her voice trembling with both fear and excitement as she narrated. Soccer moms whispered furiously among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Maria Santos, the gas station attendant, pressed against the glass doors inside, eyes wide, mouth already forming words of protest. David catalogued everything. Years of investigative training meant he noticed angles, recordings, witnesses. He saw the HD dome camera mounted above the convenience store entrance, its red light blinking steadily. He knew that camera might become his salvation, but before justice, there would be violence. Matthews stepped closer, his hand hovering just above his holstered gun. "You don't get to dictate terms here," he hissed. Then louder for the audience, "He's going for something." The move was sudden. Matthews lunged, seizing David's arm with brutal force. Sullivan joined instantly, twisting the other arm back. The motion tore David's expensive suit at the seam. Before he could react, they drove him forward, slamming him face first into the hot asphalt. The thud of impact reverberated across the parking lot, a sickening sound that made several bystanders cry out. Gravel scraped his cheek, leaving cuts that bled immediately, the sting sharpened by the heat of the pavement. David's breath rushed out of him. His gold watch scraped the rough ground, leaving deep scratches on the polished surface. Matthews dropped his full weight on David's back, his knee pressing cruelly against the base of David's neck. The pressure restricted his breathing, the heat from the asphalt searing through torn skin. "Stop resisting!" "Stop resisting!" Matthews shouted theatrically, though David had gone completely still, his body pinned. The phrase echoed across the lot, a practiced script meant to justify brutality. The crowd erupted in outrage. "He wasn't doing anything!" Maria Santos burst out the store doors, her accented voice slicing through the chaos. "I saw everything. He was just getting gas." "Let him go!" cried an elderly white woman in a pearl necklace, stepping forward despite the danger. That man was completely cooperative. The teenager live streaming shouted to her phone, "Y'all, I am literally watching police brutality happen right now." Her words broadcast in real time to thousands, soon to millions. Matthews ignored them all. He leaned harder, knee grinding into David's neck, his hands aggressively patting down pockets. "Let's see what we've got here, Mr. Richardson," he sneered, voice dripping with mockery. He rifled through jacket and pants, pulling out a leather wallet, a key ring, a phone, each item ordinary, legal, mundane. "Probably stolen," he muttered loudly, ensuring the crowd heard his insinuation. But the scene was crumbling under the weight of its own lies. Witnesses shook their heads, voices rose in protest. Every camera caught every second. David's voice, muffled against the pavement yet steady, carried enough to be recorded. "Officer Matthews, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights, using excessive force, and conducting an illegal detention. Multiple witnesses are recording this." His words were precise, clinical, the language of law, even as blood trickled from his cheek. Sullivan, nervous now, glanced at the crowd. Phones were everywhere. He needed more justification, more narrative to explain their violence. And then, In an act of desperation that would destroy his life, he reached up with his own hand, dug his fingernails into the side of his neck, and dragged them down hard. Red welts appeared instantly, thin rivulets of blood following. The pain burned, but fear pushed him forward. "He attacked me." Sullivan staggered back dramatically, clutching the self-inflicted wounds. "Did you see that?" "He clawed my neck when I got close." The crowd erupted. "That's impossible!" shouted Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired professor who had stopped for coffee. She pointed with authority. "That man has been face down the entire time. He never moved his hands." The teenager screamed into her live stream, "I've been recording everything." "He never touched him." This cop just scratched himself. Maria Santos waved frantically at the security camera above the store. "Our camera recorded everything. He didn't do anything." Sullivan froze, panic flooding his features as his eyes darted toward the blinking red light of the security camera. The electronic witness had captured every second. His staged performance collapsed instantly. "Maybe it happened earlier," he stammered. But Dr. Williams cut him off sharply. "Young man, you just scratched yourself and blamed that citizen. We all saw it. That camera saw it. You cannot lie your way out of this." But Matthews pressed on, too entrenched in his false narrative to stop. He keyed his radio again, voice booming with false authority. "Central, suspect violently resisted arrest, assaulted Officer Sullivan, and we were forced to use necessary force. Request supervisor and medical support for injured officer." Each word a lie. Each word recorded by phones and the camera. Each word destined to be dissected in federal court. David, pinned but unbroken, spoke with icy composure. "Officer Sullivan, you just committed perjury and attempted to frame me for assault while injuring yourself. Officer Matthews, you are now accessory to his crimes. Officers Rodriguez and Bradley, you are witnesses and participants in violations of constitutional rights." His words were a legal litany, spoken with the certainty of someone who knew the system from the inside. Matthews pressed harder, sweat dripping onto David's back. "I don't care what you think you know about the law," he snarled. "You're going to jail today. You're going to learn respect," the crowd shouted louder. "We saw everything. He didn't touch him. Get off him." The atmosphere trembled like a powder keg, one spark away from eruption. Rodriguez, perhaps uncertain, began rifling through David's vehicle without consent. Papers scattered across the hood. Insurance forms, registration, a phone charger, sanitizer. Nothing illegal. "This is an illegal search," David stated firmly, voice strained but unwavering. "You have no warrant, no probable cause, and I refused consent." Rodriguez ignored him, but the phones captured her every move. The performance of dominance was unraveling. Sullivan clutched his bleeding neck, realizing too late the catastrophic mistake. Witnesses called him out by name. The teenager's live stream scrolled with furious comments, thousands condemning the officers in real time. Maria pointed again at the security camera. Dr. Williams, her academic voice cutting through, declared, "Officers, you are destroying your careers. Every second is recorded. The law will not protect you." Matthews yanked David up roughly, blood dripping onto his torn white shirt. His face flushed with anger, his breath ragged. The crowd gasped as the movement shifted David's jacket just enough to reveal a flash of metallic glint at his belt. Not yet recognizable to most, but unmistakable to Dr. Williams, who stood at the perfect angle. Her eyes widened. "Oh my God," she whispered. But Matthews, blinded by rage, continued his tirade. "You're going to pay for this," he growled. His grip tightened, his control slipping, unaware that the tide of power had already begun to turn. The metallic glint would soon reveal itself fully. The symbol beneath the torn fabric would change everything. But for now, the brutality continued. The lies piled higher, and the officers remained convinced they were untouchable. What they did not know was that in the span of minutes, the narrative would collapse. Their lies would become evidence, and their careers would crumble before witnesses, cameras, and the law itself. The hunters thought they had their prey. But the stage was set for the most spectacular reversal they could imagine. The parking lot had become a theater of chaos. 4 officers encircled a single man who had committed no crime, their voices barking commands, their movements forceful and aggressive. Witnesses stood in stunned disbelief, phones raised like shields of accountability. David Richardson's cheek bled from the scrape against asphalt, his expensive suit torn, his breath shallow from the weight pressing down on him. The scene could have been anywhere in America. A black man brutalized in broad daylight for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. But fate had set this confrontation across the street from Millbrook Heights Police Station, and fate was about to turn their false authority into ashes. Matthews yanked David upward with rough hands, ignoring the torn fabric, ignoring the blood. His voice dripped with venom as he spat, "You're going to jail today. You'll learn what respect means in my town." His words carried across the semicircle of witnesses, bouncing off car doors and concrete. The crowd murmured with outrage, and Dr. Patricia Williams stepped closer, her professor's voice ringing with authority. "Officers, you have crossed every line. This man has been cooperative from the beginning. I saw it all. So did everyone here. You are destroying your own careers." Matthews glared at her with contempt, but her words only amplified the unease creeping into the ranks of his colleagues. Sullivan's self-inflicted scratches burned against his skin, the blood drying uncomfortably. He shifted, eyes darting nervously toward the security camera that had recorded his deception. Rodriguez shuffled papers she had pulled from David's car, realizing there was nothing remotely incriminating among them. Bradley's hand, once poised on his weapon, now hovered uncertainly. David straightened slightly under Matthews's grip, his torn jacket shifting with the motion. The morning sun caught a glint of something metallic at his belt. At first it was just a flash, a reflection that might have been mistaken for a belt buckle. But Dr. Williams, standing at just the right angle, froze as her eyes adjusted. Her heart quickened. It wasn't an ordinary glint, it was a 5-pointed star. Her voice rose sharply, urgent and commanding. "Oh my God, Officer Matthews, look at his belt. Do you see what that is?" Matthews glanced dismissively at David's waist, irritated by the interruption. But then his eyes registered it. The star gleamed unmistakably in the sunlight, the official badge of the Millbrook Heights police chief. The sight drained the color from Matthews's face. His sneer collapsed into horror, his grip loosening involuntarily. His chest rose and fell as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." Sullivan's performance died mid-gesture. His hands froze at his bleeding neck, his expression contorting into dread. The scratches that had been his weapon of deceit were now nothing more than scars of shame, evidence of a lie unraveling in real time. Rodriguez's papers fluttered from her hands, scattering across the asphalt like confetti at a funeral. Bradley stepped backward instinctively, his fingers sliding away from the grip of his holstered weapon, his eyes wide with disbelief. The crowd gasped collectively, the realization rippling through them like electricity. Silence fell so suddenly that even traffic noise seemed to fade. Only the faint hum of the gas pumps and the crackle of radio static remained. David pulled his shoulders back, straightening his torn suit jacket to reveal the badge fully. Blood streaked his cheek, dust clung to his clothes, but the golden star gleamed like a beacon of truth. His voice, calm yet commanding, cut through the stunned quiet. "Officer Matthews, Officer Sullivan, Officer Rodriguez, Officer Bradley, I am Police Chief David Richardson, your new commanding officer. As of 8 o'clock this morning," the words landed like thunder. Matthews staggered as though struck physically. His knees wobbled, and he nearly collapsed. Sullivan's face turned a sickly shade of green as the weight of what he had done crashed down on him. Rodriguez covered her mouth with a trembling hand, while Bradley muttered under his breath, "Oh God." Witnesses erupted. Maria Santos crossed herself, whispering prayers of gratitude and disbelief. The teenager live-streaming screamed into her phone, "Y'all are not going to believe this. He's the chief. They just assaulted their own chief." Dr. Williams shook her head in amazement, muttering, "History. We are witnessing history." The construction worker laughed out loud, the absurdity overwhelming him. David's voice grew firmer, resonating with the authority of a man who had commanded officers for 2 decades. "You have just committed assault, battery, false imprisonment, illegal search and seizure. You filed false reports, and one of you attempted to fabricate evidence by injuring yourself." He paused deliberately, letting each charge sink in. "And you did all of this in front of 17 witnesses, 8 recording devices, and a security camera." Sullivan's knees buckled, and he slid against the side of a car, burying his face in his hands. His fingers brushed the scratches on his neck, the wounds throbbing with stupidity and shame. "Chief, I'm sorry," he stammered. "I know what I did was wrong. I panicked. I scratched myself. The camera will show everything." His confession spilled out like a death sentence, sealing his fate. Matthews tried desperately to recover, his voice cracking. "Chief, sir, this was all a misunderstanding." "We didn't know." David raised a hand, silencing him instantly. "Officer Matthews, explanations ended when you put your knee on my neck. Officer Sullivan, excuses ended when you clawed your own throat and blamed me. You're both done." The crowd cheered, their voices rising in vindication. Phones zoomed in on the badge, gleaming against David's torn jacket, capturing the image that would soon flood the internet. Matthews dropped to his knees on the asphalt, tears streaking down his face, his tough cop persona evaporating. "Please, Chief, I've got 17 years on the force, a family, a mortgage." "Don't do this." His voice cracked with desperation. David's eyes were steel. "Protect the community from what, Officer Matthews? A black man buying gasoline? Officer Sullivan, were you protecting the community when you clawed yourself and lied?" His questions rang like a prosecutor's cross-examination, slicing through their hollow pleas. He pulled out his credentials, his badge and his appointment letter signed by the mayor just 48 hours earlier. Holding them high, he ensured every camera captured the proof. "I was scheduled to meet my team this morning. Instead, I've learned exactly what kind of officers I'll be commanding and which ones will be terminated." Turning with military precision, he issued orders. "Officer Sullivan, document those self-inflicted scratches and explain how you acquired them. Officer Rodriguez, secure this scene. Officer Bradley, contact Internal Affairs, the FBI Civil Rights Division, and the mayor immediately." The officers froze, realizing their victim was now giving them lawful commands they could not ignore. Rodriguez's hands trembled as she reached for her radio. Bradley swallowed hard and nodded, his face pale. Matthews collapsed fully to the ground, weeping, begging for mercy that would not come. David took Matthews' radio, his hands steady despite the blood on his skin, and spoke with devastating clarity. "Central Dispatch, this is Police Chief David Richardson. I need Internal Affairs, the FBI Civil Rights Division, and the mayor at the Chevron station on Millbrook Avenue immediately. We have 4 officers in custody for civil rights violations, assault, and filing false reports." The statement hit like a hammer. Witnesses gasped and then applauded. Dr. Williams stepped forward, her professorial voice carrying weight. "Chief Richardson, we all witnessed everything. These officers racially profiled you, used excessive force, and that one," she pointed at Sullivan, "injured himself to frame you. We will all testify." 17 witnesses nodded in agreement, their phones filled with damning footage. David turned back to the officers. "Officers Matthews, Sullivan, Rodriguez, and Bradley, you are suspended immediately without pay pending investigation. Surrender your weapons, badges, and radios now." The metallic clink of badges hitting asphalt sounded like funeral bells. Weapons placed reluctantly on the hood of David's sedan marked the end of their authority. The spectacle was complete. Hunters turned hunted, their careers disintegrating in front of cameras and witnesses. News vans screeched into the lot, satellite dishes rising, cameras already rolling. Reporters jostled for position. Amanda Lane from Channel 7 pushed forward, microphone in hand. "Chief Richardson, can you tell us what just happened here?" David straightened his torn jacket, blood still visible on his cheek, and faced the cameras. His dignity radiated through his disheveled appearance. These officers violated their oath, the Constitution, and the public trust. One even injured himself to create false evidence. It is all recorded on multiple devices and security cameras. This behavior will not be tolerated under my leadership. The crowd erupted in applause. Maria Santos shouted above the noise, "Justice! Finally justice!" The teenagers posting live updates narrated breathlessly. They scratched themselves, blamed the black guy, but he was the chief. "This video is going viral in 3, 2, 1. Notifications pinged across social platforms as the footage spread. David, now fully embodying his role as chief, stepped toward Matthews. The same officer who had shoved him, humiliated him, and pinned him now knelt trembling on hot asphalt. David pulled out his handcuffs. His voice carried absolute authority as he read the familiar words. Derek Matthews, you are under arrest for assault, civil rights violations, and abuse of authority under color of law. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. The irony burned in the morning air. Matthews, once swaggering with arrogance, now faced the system he had twisted for years. His hands were cuffed behind his back by supervisors arriving at the scene, the metal clinking with finality. The applause swelled into a roar. Justice, real and undeniable, had unfolded before their eyes. The parking lot, once filled with fear, now vibrated with catharsis. Cameras zoomed on the badge gleaming in the sun, the symbol of truth that had turned the tide. Hunters had become prey. Lies had become evidence. And justice had declared itself in the most spectacular reversal imaginable. The chaos of that September morning had ended with 4 officers stripped of their weapons, their badges lying on hot asphalt, and their authority shattered under the eyes of 17 witnesses and 8 recording devices. Yet what unfolded in the Chevron parking lot was only the prologue to a much larger reckoning. The consequences of their actions would ripple far beyond Millbrook Heights, transforming careers, laws, and even the national conversation about policing in America. Within minutes of Chief David Richardson's revelation, the videos recorded by witnesses began flooding social media. The teenager who had live-streamed the incident watched in disbelief as her feed exploded. Thousands of viewers became tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Clips of Sullivan clawing his own neck while David remained pinned to the ground spread like wildfire, captioned with words of outrage and disbelief. Cop scratches himself to frame black man. Turns out victim was the chief of police. The irony was irresistible, the footage undeniable. Hashtags trended globally within hours. Chief Richardson, Judge Justice at Chevron, Judge Sullivan scratches, and Millbrook shame. By evening, every major news outlet led with the story. CNN's breaking news banner blazed, newly appointed police chief assaulted by his own officers. MSNBC, Fox, BBC, and Al Jazeera all ran versions of the footage, the looping clip of Sullivan's desperate deception playing side by side with the moment David revealed his badge. Local networks camped outside the Chevron, interviewing witnesses who spoke with righteous indignation. Maria Santos, her voice trembling but resolute, told reporters, "He was just buying gas. They treated him like a criminal. Then we found out he was the chief. Everything changed. But he should never have been treated that way in the first place." Within 48 hours, federal authorities had seized the Chevron security footage. Special Agent Sarah Martinez of the FBI's Civil Rights Division arrived from Atlanta with a team of investigators. Standing before microphones, her steel-gray eyes scanning reporters, she declared, 4 sworn officers committed federal crimes against their commanding officer while being recorded by multiple devices. This case represents everything wrong with police culture, and it will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The investigation moved with unprecedented speed. Frame by frame, experts dissected the security video, demonstrating with irrefutable clarity that Sullivan inflicted the scratches on himself. Forensic specialists analyzed the angle, depth, and patterns of the wounds, concluding they were self-inflicted. Witness testimony aligned perfectly with the video evidence. The narrative Matthews and Sullivan had attempted to spin collapsed instantly under the weight of truth. International coverage amplified the humiliation. The BBC ran the headline, "American officers assault their own chief." In France, Le Monde described the footage as a parable of systemic racism collapsing under its own lies. Social media memes proliferated. A still image of Sullivan clawing his own neck, paired with captions like, "When the lie scratches back," spread to millions. Matthews's anguished face as David revealed the badge became a viral symbol of arrogance unraveling. 3 weeks later, a federal grand jury returned indictments. The charges were sweeping. Matthews faced counts of assault, battery, civil rights violations under color of law, conspiracy, and deprivation of rights, carrying a potential sentence of 15 years. Sullivan's indictment was even harsher: evidence tampering, filing false reports, obstruction of justice, civil rights violations, and fabrication of evidence, a federal felony that alone carried 15 years. Rodriguez and Bradley were charged as accessories, each facing up to 5 years for their silent participation and unlawful searches. The trial that followed consumed national attention. Court TV broadcast daily proceedings, legal analysts debated on primetime panels, and op-eds dissected the cultural significance. In the packed federal courtroom, David Richardson took the witness stand with the same quiet dignity he had shown on that chaotic morning. His testimony was calm, precise, unwavering. "Your Honor," he said, "these officers did not see a police chief. They did not see a public servant. They did not even see a man. They saw only my skin color and assumed criminality." Officer Sullivan's actions show the depths of prejudice. So, desperate to justify their violence, that he injured himself. To create false evidence, the prosecution played the Chevron security footage in devastating detail. Jurors watched Sullivan carefully position himself away from recording phones, then claw his own neck with deliberate force. The timestamp overlaid on the video confirmed that David was pinned motionless at the same moment. Expert testimony shredded any defense claims of panic. Forensic analysts explained how the scratches were consistent only with fingernail marks, not defensive wounds. Dr. Patricia Williams's testimony electrified the courtroom. With her credentials as professor emeritus at Emory University, she spoke with academic authority and moral clarity. "I watched 4 sworn officers systematically violate their oath. They profiled, they assaulted, they fabricated. Without Chief Richardson's badge, they would have destroyed his life. The truth was saved only by chance, that his badge was revealed before their lies prevailed." Her words echoed through headlines the next morning. Without the badge, an innocent man would be in prison. Maria Santos's testimony brought jurors to tears. Speaking in broken English, but with unshakable conviction, she said, "I came to America for justice. What I saw that day was not justice. It was hate and corruption. But what is happening in this courtroom, this is the America I believe in." Defense attorneys scrambled with desperate arguments. Matthews's lawyer claimed his client had acted in momentary panic, Sullivan's defense insisted. He had been overwhelmed by the intensity of the scene. But the prosecution dismantled these claims with methodical precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," the closing argument thundered, "we have video evidence of a police officer deliberately injuring himself and blaming an innocent man." This was not fear. This was calculated deception designed to justify violence already inflicted. The jury deliberated for less than a day. Guilty on all counts. Judge Margaret Thompson's sentencing was scathing. Officers Matthews, Sullivan, Rodriguez, and Bradley, she said, her gavel poised. "You violated your oath, the Constitution, and the sacred trust between police and citizen. Mr. Matthews, your abuse of force and racial profiling earns you 12 years in federal prison. Mr. Sullivan, your fabrication of evidence is among the most disgraceful acts this court has seen. 15 years in federal prison. Ms. Rodriguez, Mr. Bradley, your silent complicity makes you culpable. 3 years each in federal prison." The sentences landed like thunderclaps. Matthews's wife wept openly in the gallery. Sullivan sat motionless, staring at the scratches that had ruined his life. The city of Millbrook Heights moved quickly to limit fallout. Facing public outrage and the inevitability of civil litigation, the city settled David Richardson's lawsuit for $3.1 million, the largest police misconduct settlement in Georgia's history. Cameras swarmed as David announced he would donate the entire amount to police accountability initiatives, body camera programs for small departments, and racial justice nonprofits. "This money came from taxpayers who deserve better from their police," he explained. "It should go toward preventing future incidents, not enriching me." Under David's leadership, the Millbrook Heights Police Department became a laboratory of reform. He instituted what came to be known as the Richardson Protocols. Mandatory bias training became monthly instead of yearly. Civilian oversight boards reviewed every use of force incident. Body cameras were required to remain active during all interactions, with tampering grounds for termination. Aggressive enforcement strategies were replaced with community policing. Within a year, crime dropped 23%, while surveys showed community trust soaring to 94%, the highest in Georgia. The officers' downfalls were equally stark. Matthews lost everything: his pension, his home, his marriage. His children changed their last name to escape the shame. From federal prison, he gave a bitter interview claiming, "I was just doing my job. Political correctness destroyed my career." He remained incapable of remorse. Sullivan fared no better. His self-inflicted scratches had healed, but in prison he was ridiculed endlessly. Inmates taunted him as the cop who scratched himself. His family disowned him. His wife remarried. His children refused contact. The wounds that destroyed his career in seconds continued destroying his life for years. Rodriguez moved across the country, but her conviction followed her. No law enforcement agency would hire her. She found work as a retail security guard, earning minimum wage. Bradley changed professions entirely, becoming a social worker dedicated to repairing community trust, his conviction a daily reminder of the damage he had helped inflict. The case became landmark precedent. Law schools taught Richardson vs. Millbrook Heights as a defining example of constitutional accountability. Police academies used the Chevron footage as mandatory training material, showing how quickly arrogance and prejudice could implode under scrutiny. The Smithsonian added the footage and Maria Santos's testimony to its civil rights collection. A bronze plaque was installed at the Chevron site. Here, truth overcame lies. September 2024, David himself became a national figure. He testified before Congress, addressed the Congressional Black Caucus, and spoke at universities across the country. His message was consistent. Character is revealed not in power, but in how power is used. Truth will always emerge, no matter how desperately lies try to cover it. He reminded audiences that had his badge not been revealed, he might have been just another statistic, another black man railroaded by fabricated charges. The applause that followed his speeches was not just for him, but for the truth he represented. 6 months later, standing in his corner office overlooking Millbrook Heights, David watched officers play basketball with neighborhood children. The laughter of kids echoed through the park, a sound that had once been absent from police interactions. 0 excessive force complaints had been filed in the department that year. For the first time in decades, not a single civil rights lawsuit had been lodged against Millbrook Heights PD. The Richardson protocols were being studied nationwide, adopted in more than 300 departments. The legacy of that September morning stretched far beyond Millbrook. Matthews sat in a prison cell, still bitter, still refusing accountability. Sullivan lived in shame, his scratches an enduring scar on the profession he once claimed to serve. But David carried forward, his badge shining not just as a symbol of authority but of truth itself. "That morning taught me," he told an audience at Harvard Law School, "that injustice can happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime. But it also taught me that truth, courage, and evidence can triumph over prejudice and corruption." As he adjusted the badge on his belt, sunlight streaming through his office window caught its golden surface. He thought of Maria's words, "Justice, finally justice." He thought of Dr. Williams's calm defiance, of the teenager's live stream that turned into evidence, of the witnesses who refused to look away. He thought of the scratches on Sullivan's neck, a desperate lie turned into irrefutable proof of corruption. Some badges represent power. Some represent control. But the best badges, David reflected, represent truth. And truth, when revealed with courage, has the power to change everything.